The sound you hear is a warm fire crackling on the hearth in a dark candlelit smoking room on the night of December 25th. This is the start of Octoberpod. I'd been sitting with my friend Hugh Granger, my Uncle Edward, and two other men smoking cigars and enjoying a drop of brandy or cognac after the hullabaloo of an exceedingly busy Christmas day. I put another log on and poked up the fire. Hugh has got, so I've always considered, that sense of drama which is so necessary for the telling of stories, especially ghost stories. Two Ghoultide classics, Octoberpod's Ghost Story for Christmas, adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger, from the stories The Bus Conductor by E.F. Benson and A School Story by Montague R. James, narrated by Edward October. "18 months ago," Hugh began, after some prodding, "I had let my flat, you may remember, and came up from the country to stay with you for a week. We had dined alone in Graham Street, and after dinner, I went out to some party, and you stopped at home. You, gave me your latchkey when I went out, and on coming back, I found you had gone to bed. So, I suppose it was rather late when I went upstairs. You had put me in the front room on the third floor overlooking the street, a room which I thought you generally occupied yourself. Even though there had been a moon when I started to my party, on my return, the whole sky was cloud-covered, and it both looked and felt as if we might have a thunderstorm before morning. I was feeling very sleepy and heavy, and it was not till after I had got into bed that I noticed the shadows of the window frames on the blind, that only one of the windows was open. But it did not seem worthwhile to get out of bed in order to open it, though it felt rather airless and uncomfortable, and I went to sleep. What time it was when I awoke, I do not know, but it was certainly not yet dawn, and I was being conscious of such an extraordinary stillness which prevailed. There was no sound either of foot passengers or wheeled traffic. The music of life appeared to be absolutely mute. But now, instead of being sleepy and heavy, I felt, though I must have slept an hour or two at the most, since it was not yet dawn, perfectly fresh and wide awake, and the effort which had seemed not worth making before, that of getting out of bed and opening the other window, was quite easy now, and I pulled up the blind, threw it open, and leaned out. For somehow I parched and pined for fresh air. Even outside, the oppression was very noticeable, and though, as you know, I am not easily given to feel the mental effects of climate, I was aware of an awful creepiness coming over me. I tried to analyze it away, but without success. The past day had been pleasant. I looked forward to another pleasant day tomorrow, and yet I was full of some nameless apprehension. I felt, too, dreadfully lonely in this stillness before the dawn. Then I heard suddenly, and not very far away, the sound of some approaching vehicle. I could distinguish the tread of two horses walking at a slow foot-space. They were, though not yet visible, coming up the street, and yet this indication of life did not abate that dreadful sense of loneliness which I have spoken of. Also, in some dim, unformulated way, that which was coming seemed to me to have something to do with the cause of my impression. Then the vehicle came into sight. At first I could not distinguish what it was. Then I saw that the horses were black, and had long tails, and that what they dragged was made of glass but had a black frame. It was a hearse. Empty. It was moving up this side of the street. It stopped at your door. I was still leaning out of the window, and I remember also wondering, yet only momentarily, how odd it was that I saw things, or rather the one thing I was looking at, so distinctly. Of course, there was a moon behind the clouds, but it was very curious how every detail of the hearse and the horses was visible. There was only one man, the driver, with it, and the street was otherwise absolutely empty. It was at him I was looking now. I could see every detail of his clothes, but from where I was, so high above him, I could not see his face. He had on gray trousers, brown boots, black coat buttoned all the way up, and a little hat. Over his shoulder there was a strap, which seemed to support some sort of little bag. He looked exactly like a bus conductor. He looked up at me. He had a rather long, thin face, and on his left cheek there was a mole with a growth of dark hair on it. All this was as distinct as if it had been noonday, and as if I was within a yard of him. But so instantaneously was all that takes so long in the telling, I had not time to think it strange that the driver of a hearse should be so unceremoniously dressed. Then he touched his hat to me and jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. There was something so odious, so coarse, so unfeeling about this that I instantly drew my head in, pulled the blind down again, and then, for what reason I do not know, turned on the electric light in order to see what time it was. The hands of my watch pointed to 11:30. There was stillness and silence again. I expected every moment to hear muffled footsteps on the stairs, footsteps moving slowly and smallly under the weight of a heavy burden. But from inside the house there was no sound whatever. Outside, too, there was the same dead silence, while the hearse waited at the door. And the minutes ticked on, and at length I began to see a difference in the light in the room, and knew that the dawn was beginning to break outside. But how had it happened, then, that if the corpse was to be removed at night, it had not gone, and that the hearse still waited when morning was already coming? Presently I got out of bed again, and with the sense of strong physical shrinking, I went to the window and pulled back the blind. The dawn was coming fast. The whole street was lit by that silver, hueless light of morning. But there was no hearse there. Once again I looked at my watch. It was just 4:15, but I would swear that not half an hour had passed since it had told me that it was 11:30. Then a curious double sense, as if I was living in the past and at the same moment had been living in some other time, came over me. It was dawn on June 25th, and the street, as natural, was empty. But a little while ago the driver of a hearse had spoken to me, and it was 11:30. What was that driver? To what plane did he belong? And again, what 11:30 was it that I had seen recorded on the dial of my watch? And then I told myself the whole thing had been a dream. But if you ask me whether I believed what I told myself, I must confess I did not. I can only say that I believed myself to have been wide awake. In any case, the rest of the story is odd. I went out of town again the next afternoon, and I may say that I don't think that even for a moment did I get the haunting sense of what I had seen or dreamed that night out of my mind. It was present to me always, as some vision unfulfilled. It was as if some clock had struck the 4 quarters, and I was still waiting to hear what the hour would be. Months afterward, I was in London again, but only for the day. I arrived at Victoria about 11, and took the underground to Sloane Street in order to see if you were in town and would give me lunch. Crisp white snowflakes began to shower down and coat the street. I intended to take a bus from the King's Road as far as Graham Street. There was one standing at the corner just as I came out of the station, but I saw that the top was full and the inside appeared to be full also. Just as I came up to it, the conductor, who I suppose had been inside collecting fares and whatnot, came out onto the step within a few feet of me. He wore gray trousers, brown boots, a black coat buttoned all the way up, a little conductor's hat, and over his shoulder was a strap on which hung his little machine for punching tickets. I saw his face, too. It was the face of the driver of the hearse, with a mole on his left cheek. Then he spoke to me, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. At that, a sort of panic took possession of me, and I knew I gesticulated wildly with my arms and cried, "No, no!" But at that moment I was living not in the hour that was then passing, but in that hour which had passed months ago on that hot, oppressive night, when I leaned from the window of the bedroom just before the dawn broke. At this moment, too, I knew that my spy-hole had been opposite the spy-hole into the spiritual world. What I had seen there had some significance, now being fulfilled, and I stood there on the pavement, shaking and trembling in the snow. I was opposite the post office at the corner, and just as the bus started, my eye fell on the clock in the window. It was 4:15. The bus pulled out from the pavement into the street in order to get round a van that was standing in front of it. At the moment, there came down the King's Road a big motor car going at a hideously reckless pace. It skidded on the slippery skin of new-fallen snow and crashed full into the bus, burrowing into it like a steel bolt. "And that's my story," he said. We sat in silence for many minutes before my Uncle Edward struck up a conversation with the older gentleman sitting closest to him about their private school days. "At our school," said Uncle Edward, "we had a ghost's footmark on the staircase. Oh, very unconvincing. Just the shape of a shoe with a square toe, if I remember right. The staircase was a stone one. I never heard any story about the thing, which seems odd when you come to think of it. Why didn't somebody invent a story, I wonder?" "You never can tell with little boys. They have a mythology of their own. There's a subject for you. The folklore of private schools. I imagine if you were to investigate the cycle of ghost stories, for instance, which the boys at private schools tell each other, they would all turn out to be highly compressed versions of stories out of books." The older man at Uncle Edward's elbow said, "I really don't know if it counts as a boys' school haunting, but this is what was in my mind. It happened at my private school 30-odd years ago, and I haven't any explanation of it." The school, I mean, was near London. It was established in a large and fairly old house, a great white building with very fine grounds about it. There were large cedars in the garden, as there are in so many of the older gardens in the Thames Valley, and ancient elms in 3 or 4 fields which we used for our games. When I came there, I became fast friends with a Highland boy, whom I will call MacLeod, and got to know him very well. He was not an exceptional boy in any way, not particularly good at books or games, but he suited me. The school was a large one. There must have been from 120 to 130 boys there as a rule, and so a considerable staff of masters was required, and there was rather frequent changes among them. One term, perhaps it was my third or fourth, a new master made his appearance. His name was Samson. He was a tallish, stoutish, pale, black-bearded man. I think we liked him. He had traveled a good deal, and had stories which amused us on our school walks, so that there was some competition among us to get within earshot of him. I remember, too, that he had a charm on his watch chain that attracted my attention one day, and he let me examine it. It was a gold Byzantine coin. There was an effigy of some absurd emperor on one side. The other side had been worn practically smooth, and he had cut on it, rather barbarously, his own initials, GWS, and a date, 24 July, 1892. He told me he had picked it up in Constantinople. Well, the first odd thing that happened was this. Samson was doing Latin grammar with us. One of his favorite methods was to make us construct sentences out of our own heads to illustrate the rules he was trying to make us learn. Of course, that is a thing which gives a silly boy a chance of being impertinent. There are lots of school stories in which that happens, or anyhow, there might be. But Samson was too good a disciplinarian for us to think of trying that with him. Now, on this occasion, he was telling us how to express remembering in Latin, and he ordered us each to make a sentence bringing in the verb memini, I remember. Well, most of us made up ordinary sentences such as, I remember my father, or I remember his book, or something equally uninteresting. But the boy I mentioned, MacLeod, was evidently thinking of something more elaborate than that. The rest of us wanted to have our sentences passed and get on to something else. So someone kicked him under the desk, and I, who was next to him, poked him and whispered to him to look sharp. But he didn't seem to attend me. I looked at his paper and saw he had put down nothing at all. So I jogged him again, harder than before, for keeping us all waiting. That did have some effect. He started and seemed to wake up. And then very quickly he scribbled about a couple of lines on his paper and showed it up with the rest. As it was the last to come in, it turned out that the clock struck 12 before he had got to MacLeod, and so MacLeod had to wait afterward to have his sentence corrected. There was nothing much going on outside when I got out, so I waited for him to come. He came very slowly when he did arrive, and I guessed there had been some sort of trouble. He told me there was no trouble at all, but that he felt Samson was rather sick with him. The sentence he'd written was memento putei interquatur taxus. I asked what did all of that silly rot mean, and what had possessed him to shove it all down. MacLeod shrugged and told me he hadn't the foggiest on both accounts. He said, all I know is it just came into my head and I corked it down. I know what I think it means, because just before I wrote it down, I had a sort of picture of it in my head. I believe it means, remember the well among the four... What are those dark sort of trees that have red berries on them? Yews. The boy told me Samson was jolly odd about it. When he read it, he got up and went to the mantelpiece and stopped quite a long time without saying anything, with his back turned. And then he asked, without turning round and rather quiet, what MacLeod thought he had meant. I told him what I thought, only I couldn't remember the name of the silly tree, and then he wanted to know why I put it down, and I had to say something or other, and after that he left off talking about it, and asked me how long I'd been here, and where my people lived, and things like that, and then I came away. But he wasn't looking a bit well. Next day, MacLeod took to his bed with a chill or something of the kind, and it was a week or more before he was in school again, and as much as a month went by without anything happening that was noticeable. Whether or not Mr. Samson was really startled, as MacLeod had thought, he didn't show it. I'm pretty sure, of course, now that there was something very curious in his past history, but I'm not going to pretend that we boys were sharp enough to guess any such thing. There was one other incident. There came a day when we were going through those dismal things which people call conditional sentences, and we were told to make a conditional sentence expressing a future consequence. We did it, rightly or wrongly, and showed up our bits of paper, and Samson began looking through them. All at once he got up, made some odd sort of noise in his throat, and rushed out by a door that was just by his desk. Of course, I thought someone must have put down some nonsense or other, and Samson had gone off to report him. All the same, I noticed that he hadn't taken any of the papers with him when he ran out. Well, the top paper on the desk was written in red ink, which no one used, and it wasn't in anyone's hand who was in the class. They all looked at it, McLeod and all, and took their dying oaths that it wasn't theirs. Then I thought of counting the bits of paper, and of this I made quite certain that there were 17 bits of paper on the desk and only 16 boys in attendance. Well, I bagged the extra paper and kept it, and I believe I have it now. And so now I suppose you will want to know what was written on it. It was simple enough and harmless enough, I should have said. The man pulled from his breast pocket a scrap of paper that bore the marks of at least 40 years of folding and unfolding for the purposes of repeated examination. This the older gentleman did, and read the writing upon it. Si tu non veneris ad me, ego veniam ad te. Which means, I suppose, if you don't come to me, I'll come to you. After about an hour, Samson looked in again, said he had felt very unwell, and told us we might go. He came rather gingerly to his desk and gave just one look at the uppermost paper. Anyhow, he asked no questions. That day was a half holiday, and next day Samson was in school again, much as usual. That night, the third and last incident in my story happened. We, McLeod and I, slept in a dormitory at right angles to the main building. Samson slept in the main building on the first floor. There was a very bright full moon. Sometime between 1 and 2, I was woken up by somebody shaking me. It was McLeod. In a nice state of mind he seemed to be in, he told me to come and look, that a burglar was getting in through Samson's window. Naturally, I came and looked, and naturally there was no one there. I was cross enough, and should have called McLeod plenty of names, only I couldn't tell why. It seemed to me there was something wrong, something that made me very glad that I wasn't alone to face it. We were still at the window looking out, and as soon as I could, I asked him what he had heard or seen. He said, "About 5 minutes before I woke you, I found myself looking out of this window here, and there was a man sitting or kneeling on Samson's windowsill and looking in, and I thought he was beckoning. I couldn't tell you what sort of man he was, but he was beastly thin, and he looked as if he was wet all over, and," he said, looking round and whispering, as if he hardly liked to hear himself, "I'm not at all sure that he was alive." And the next day Mr. Samson was gone, not to be found, and I believe no trace of him has ever come to light since. In thinking it over, one of the oddest things about it all was the fact that neither McLeod nor I ever mentioned what we had seen to any third person whatever. Of course, no questions were asked on the subject, and if they had been, I am inclined to believe that we could not have made any answer. We seemed unable to speak about it. The sequel to this tale may perhaps be reckoned highly conventional, but a sequel there is, so it must be produced. Last year I was staying at a country house in Ireland. One evening, my host was turning over a drawer full of odds and ends in the smoking room. Suddenly, he put his hand upon a little box. "Now," he said, "you know about old things. Tell me what that is." I opened the little box and found in it a thin gold chain with an object attached to it. I asked my host about the history of the object. "Odd enough," was the answer. "You know the yew thicket in the shrubbery. Well, a year or two back we were cleaning out the old well that used to be in the clearing there, and what do you suppose we found?" I asked, with an odd feeling of nervousness, if they'd found a body. He nodded and told me they'd found not one body, but two. My host said the object on the chain was amongst the rags of the clothes that were on one of the bodies. One body had the arms tight round the other. They must have been there 40 years or more, long enough before we came to this place, he said. You may judge we filled the well up fast enough. The object was a coin, and carved upon it were the initials GWS and the date 24 July 1892. Stick around after the credits for a brief word from some of our fellow indie podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are MJ McAdams and Amber Jordan. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select still photography courtesy of unsplash.com. Select music cues by Dr. Dreamchip and various other stock music and sound effects courtesy of freesound.org. Music from Bigfoot Apocalypse and Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, composed by Nico Vitezi. All other images, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are sourced from within the public domain. Follow us on YouTube at Octoberpod Home Video, on Instagram, and the app I still call Twitter at Octoberpod VHS, and on TikTok and Blue Sky at Octoberpod. Or find us and all of our links on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this program, we'd be very pleased if you told your friends about us. And while you're at it, write us a 5-star or equivalent review wherever you're listening. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October.
Hello friends, are you feeling down? Do you need a pick-me-up? Well, look no further, for I have the solution. Just go to your nearest podcast store and pick up a box of Backlit Cinema, the podcast. That's right, folks. Backlit Cinema, the podcast, will cure what ails you. The sweet, smooth, and gentle chit-chat of the movies of yesteryear will fulfill your aching nostalgia and improve your overall well-being. The soothing sounds of your host, Zoe Richardson, talking about your favorite moments of these classic films is guaranteed to lift your spirits. The behind-the-scenes trivia that you'll learn will fill you with awe and wonderment. Don't hesitate. Try Backlit Cinema, the podcast, now with no artificial flavors or colors.
Warning, the aforementioned claims of improved well-being or is a cure to any ailment cannot be substantiated.
They rule the streets. They take what they want.
Hand it over, street meats, before we make you dead meat.
And you'll have to deal with them if you want to make it through the night. If Ashley wants to survive, she'll need to fight on their turf. She'll have to fight dirty.
Stop struggling.
And she'll have to pick them off one by one if she hopes to make it through the night. Make It Through the Night, the savage novel of revenge and violence on the streets by Amy Cotto. Available now from Amazon.com. Find more by author Amy Cotto by visiting tvfanatic.blog or on Twitter at TV_fanatic_girl. Make It Through the Night by Amy Cotto. Her night from hell has only just begun.
First impressions can take only 6 seconds to make. But if you're neurodivergent, those quick judgments about you can be misleading.
Because of most people's ignorance around learning disabilities, people think it means you're intellectually incapable.
I'm not Rain Man. Every autistic person isn't Rain Man.
I thought I was talking to people who understood dyslexia and ADHD, but they did not.
They freaked out and were like, well, if you've got Tourette's, if it's going to be a problem, then we can just fire you and get someone else.
I'm Carolyn Keel, and I host Beyond 6 Seconds, a podcast where neurodivergent people share their lives and advocacy.
One of my goals is making autism not something that's scary.
I really want to help people understand dyspraxia a little bit better.
Get the real life of Tourette syndrome out there. Stop thinking we were nothing but a joke.
Let's shatter misconceptions and celebrate neurodiversity together. Listen at beyond6seconds.net or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Pitney.
And I'm Amelia.
And we're from
Pitney and Amelia's Bitchin' Boutique. Who are we?
Why, we're your new best friends, of course.
Pull up a seat and listen in to what we think about people, places, and things.
Geeky stuff, horror movies, weirdos we know, spirituality, sexuality, food, filth.
It's like eavesdropping on the people at the next table for like an hour or so, and wishing you could join in on their conversation.
Also, do you see who just came in? Look at that hair.
Oh, honey, just no.
Bitchiness, you're soaking in it.
We soften your hands while you do the dishes.
Pitney and Amelia's Bitchin' Boutique.
We're here.
We're queer. And we're
in your ear. Every other Friday, where all the classiest podcasts are found.
This is Edward October reading for It's a Wonderful Life, and this one is Ernie. There was one other incident. There came a day when we... Where's my fucking cursor? I'm gonna redo that one in case I feel like there's a typo. I feel like it should be this here honeymoon, so I'm gonna do it like that. Hey, where are you two going on this here honeymoon? This is Edward October reading for The Panic Within, the Gambler, in the role of the old man. When I read this, I hear a Bela Lugosi accent in my head, so that's what I'm going to do. I'll do 3 takes of that, and if that's not what you're looking for, just let me know. Hot dog. Then what? The storage unit belonged to Crazy Man. Professor Philo. He is obsessed. I am sorry. Oh, shit, just decided to make noise. And also these first 2 lines, since they're part of the same sentence, I'm going to read them together so that I can sort of get the rhythm of the sentence down. So anyway, here we go. Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death? I am sorry. I am man trying to helping. Oh, I need a drink. I need a drink. I need a drink. I need a drink. I was feeling very sleepy and very heavy. Jesus Christ. I was feeling very sleepy and heavy. It was not till after I had got into bed that I noticed by the shadows of the window frame on the blind. God damn, what a clunky fucking sentence. I was feeling very sleepy and heavy, and it was not till after I had got into bed that I noticed by the shadows of the window frames on the blind that only one of the windows was open. Motherfucker. Fuck. God damn it, now I gotta read this fuck again. Alright. I am sorry. You will be fine. I am not thief. Hey, everybody, how about a toast? Hey, everybody, how about a toast? Hey, everybody, how about a toast? I am not thief. I am man trying to helping. Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death? Sorry, I have tried to warning you. Hey, yippee! Hooray! That's the spirit. All right. Now we're talking. How many is that? 2? 3? Let me do one more. Struggling grunts. Yeah. God, give it. Come on. Will almost be ended. His early research is important. I am sorry. Our youth is wasted on the wrong people. End music effect. That's the end. Hope that works. Let me know if you're looking for something completely different, which is very possible. Bye-bye.
Some late-breaking news. The Calaveras County Sheriff's Office has confirmed that a series of break-ins are occurring throughout the county. All of these, we are told, are somehow linked to a recent break-in at the Calaveras County morgue. We've now received reports of violence associated with these incidents. Details are still sketchy in this evolving situation. Calaveras County Sheriff Jennifer Cameron is urging everyone to stay in their homes as the situation unfolds. I'm Edward October, and I can't think of a better idea than staying indoors. You may hear the wind picking up outside, and perhaps your car is beginning to disappear under a skiff of new snowfall. We've got the soundtrack to keep you in a cozy holiday mood. Keep it right here.